Okay, so in this tutorial we are going to create some simple GUI elements, essentially a score that is going to add to the score when I run into my cube and is going to subtract from my score when I run into this sphere. At the moment in my game scene I have a sphere that's controllable with the keyboard, I have a cube and a cylinder, and I've created just a simple maze using a plane and a bunch of different cubes with a simple material on them. So to start with, what we're going to do is create our GUI element. So I want to have a score that sits in the top left-hand corner of the screen. So if I choose Create in my hierarchy and come down to UI, you can see this first option here is text. This then places a canvas in my scene, and on that canvas we have text. So basically we just want that text to say score at this point so we can actually see it. And here in our rectangle transform, we want to tell it where on our GUI or where on that canvas we want it to be displayed. So if I click here and hold down Alt on your keyboard, we can actually just choose this one here that says top left. And you can see now on my game window we have this tiny little word score up here in the top window. So I'm going to increase my font size to 40. And you can see that that's actually made it disappear. So the text is larger than the the text box that it's sitting in. So what I can do is with my text selector, just come up here and choose my rectangle tool. Just going to double click on it so I can see it. And I can actually bring that out until I can actually see my score here. So now that I can see my score at the top of the screen, I don't want it to be sitting so far to the left and so far to the top like that. I want to bring it down and inwards a little bit so we can actually change the position here slightly. So we can see that the position here on the X and Y is at 141.3 and minus 36.29. I just want to bring that across a little bit more and down a little bit more. So here I can possibly bring this up to say 170. Or even 61.70, and on the Y I'm just going to bring that down 20-ish, so we'll just go minus 55. We can see now that that's got a nice little bit of padding around it and it's not sitting so far into the top left hand corner. Okay, so that is actually creating our score, and what I'm going to do up here is just name that. And I'm just going to call it count text because that's going to be our text area that counts our score. Now this text that I've written in this text box, we'll get rid of that soon. So at the moment this is just placeholder text. What we're going to do is create a script that actually displays the score at the top and has a dynamic counter. So every time I interact with a cube, it will add 1 point to my score, and every time I interact with the cylinder, it'll minus 1 point from my score. So let's get started with our script. So we're going to actually add this into our player controller script because it's our player that we want to sort of dictate what happens to the score. So here is a simple player controller script that I've created earlier. So we basically have a script here accessing the rigid body and allowing our player to move with keyboard controls. That's in the fixed update. I've then added a void on collision function, and on that I've sort of say if it collides with something called pickup, set the pickup object or the other game object to false. If it collides with the game object enemy, then set this to false. So at the moment what I have is my cube set to pickup and my cylinder set to enemy. What I'm going to do is just slightly change this a little bit. I'm going to copy that and change it to my enemy. So essentially now no matter which one I interact with or which one I collide with, the other thing is going to disappear. I also need to add a script in here which says add one to the point to the score, and I need to add a script in here that says -1 from the score. But first we need to set up some variables that are going to hold our score, and we need to set up a way of having that score display in the right area. So the first thing we're going to do is set up a private integer variable, and we're going to call that count. Now count is going to keep count of our score, so it's going to be the one that sort of holds the value of where our score is sitting at any point in the game. Underneath that, we're also going to create a public text object, and that is going to be called count text. So this is actually referring to the game object text that we have on our GUI. Now you can see at the moment that there's a bit of a problem here. It hasn't highlighted text in blue, and it's put a red line under it. It's not really understanding what this text feature is. Now at the moment, that's because we haven't selected the Unity class at the top of the screen here. So what we want to say here is we're using Unity Engine.ui. So now it thinks, oh, okay, great. We're using all of these classes from pre-built in scripts. So once that has been selected there, it will recognize that we're using UI elements. And we should find that this will now register as a game object rather than just an error. Okay, they're the two variables that we're going to be using. Now on initialization of the game, so in our start menu, we want to set that count to 0. So when the game first starts up, we want the score to start at 0. So in here, we just add a value to that variable count. We also in this area want to set the count text. So we want to say, make sure that when the game starts up, that we are displaying something at the top of the screen in this count text area that says score and displays a score. So what we need to do is actually write a function for that, and then we call the function in the start function. Okay, so down here underneath our void collision enter, at the very bottom of our script, but before the mono behavior class closes, we're going to create a function. So we start with the word void, and the function is going to be called set count text, because that is ideally what it's going to be doing. And in this one we say count text, little letter, dot text equals. So count text is this variable we've got at the top of the screen, which is going to be related to the game object that we have in our hierarchy. So set count text equals, and we want it to present the string score. And next to the word score, we want it to say whatever the value of the variable count is, but we want that displayed as a string. So we're turning that variable count into a string or a word like so. And up here in our start function, we can now call that new function we've just created. So we can say set count text, and so when the game starts up, it'll set that count to 0 and it'll run this function. So there is one last thing that we need to do in here. So at the moment our score is set to 0, and our score will display as a string in the top left hand corner where we've put our game object, our text game object, but it doesn't change at this point. So what we need to do is say when this collision happens, so if the other game object is called pickup, set the other game object to false, but also change the value of count to whatever the value of count already is, plus 1. And down here under our enemy, we want to say count equals whatever the value of count is, minus 1. Okay, so this means that when it rolls over one of the cubes and goes to pick up, we'll add one to our count. But at the moment, our dynamic text is only being run on the start function. So we need to call this set count text function again here. So it actually updates our dynamic score with what the new count to string is. So we do that for both of these ones here. So now it's adding 1 or minusing 1 from the score. It's running our function, which basically says make sure that our score is whatever the count variable is, and we'll update our score. So if we go save, come back to Unity, we should now be able to play it and see our dynamic score. But there's a couple of things that we need to make sure we do first. And the first one is to set the value of our count text variable. So when we click on our player, we see that we have this new variable that we've created called count text. And at the moment it's saying none, it needs a text. So it's saying, fine, I've got this score to display, but where would you like me to display it? And so we set the value of that variable to the GUI element we made earlier, count text. We can also now click on our count text, and this score that we set up earlier we don't actually need anymore, so we can remove that from our text area and leave it blank because our script is going to generate the string that appears in this box. So once those things have been updated, you can press play, and we should see my score at the top of the screen has automatically been set to 0, and it's displaying my text there. If I roll into my cube, my score goes up to 1. If I roll into my cylinder, it goes back to 0. And because I have this instantiate script in my scene, if I hit any one of these cubes, they're all labeled as pickup. Easier said than done. They're all labeled as pickup, so I should be able to roll over them and add those to the score as well. You can see at this stage it's quite difficult for me to play this game. One, because my sphere's kind of moving off and my camera's on a strange angle, and it can be very difficult to control your player when the camera is static like this. So in the next tutorial we'll look at how to make your camera follow your player so that you have a more dynamic game. But for now, this is how you would add or minus things from your score.